What if the building you live in wasn't haunted, but alive and hungry? When Lucas Jang moves into Andal Court Tower, he thinks he's getting a fresh start, but behind every flickering light and crooked hallway lies a secret buried deep in concrete and time, rituals, vanished tenants, and rules that must never be broken. This isn't just an apartment, it's a trap, and the deeper Lucas digs, the more he realizes the tower doesn't want him to leave, ever. Tonight, we enter a place where forgetting the rules means vanishing forever. Welcome to Andal Court Tower. The first sign that something was wrong with Hemlock Creek came not from the town itself, but from the silence that greeted Caleb Horn as he stepped out of his car. The road trip from Savannah had been long and uneventful. Caleb had driven through sleepy southern towns before, but this one felt suspended. Trees drooped with moss like tired sentinels, and the welcome sign, tilted and cracked, simply read, Hemlock Creek, founded 1882. No population count, no motto, just peeling paint and an aftertaste of dust. He slammed the car doors shut and looked up at the gray afternoon sky. Clouds, low and swollen, hung like bruises. A crow cawed once and then went quiet. Caleb shifted the duffel bag on his shoulder and walked toward the porch of the old cabin he'd rented online. A week-long escape to finish his latest article on Southern Gothic folklore. The irony wasn't lost on him. A horror writer coming to a forgotten town known for whispers in the dark and a creek that remembers. The cabin sat on the outskirts, a good mile away from town proper. A relic from another century, oak panels warped from humidity, window panes fogged and smeared. But it was the bell above the door that stopped Caleb. An old rusted school bell nailed into the porch frame, dangling without rope. Just as he reached for the doorknob, it rang. No wind, no birds, no movement, just one loud metallic clang that echoed far longer than it should have. Caleb froze. The sound died. He opened the door. Inside was stale wood, mothball air, and the scent of damp newspaper. A few pieces of antique furniture were scattered around. A velvet armchair, a roll-top desk, an upright piano missing half its keys. Leather clung to everything. He walked to the table and placed the duffel bag down, then noticed the journal resting beneath it, not his. Leather-bound, with initials scrawled in shaky cursive, M.R. He opened to the first page. June 3rd, 1984. The children keep humming the same tune. I swear, I never taught it to them. Caleb closed the journal slowly and placed it back. He hadn't come here to play detective, just to write and be alone. He'd been alone for almost 8 months now, since Anna passed. But silence had never felt this attentive. He grabbed his notebook, stepped out onto the porch, and lit a cigarette. The trees beyond the clearing swayed gently, but the air was still. That's when he saw it. Across the field, standing where the tree line began, was a woman, too far to see clearly, pale, hair long and dark, hanging like wet threads. She didn't move, just stood there, arms by her sides, head slightly tilted, as if she was waiting for something. Caleb blinked. She was gone. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and exhaled a shaky breath of smoke. Long drive, lack of sleep, residual grief playing tricks on him, the usual suspects. The next morning, the creek called to him. It ran behind the cabin, a slow, winding snake of water that shimmered like oil. Locals once called it Whisper Creek, according to a forum Caleb had read late one night, rumors of it, remembering what it shown and echoing the sins of the drowned. Stories, fiction, the stuff he made a living from. He walked the edge, taking notes, snapping photos. Trees arched over the water like ribs, enclosing the space in twilight even during the day. He crouched to photograph a strange set of markings etched into a stone on the bank, 3 concentric circles around a crude eye. At that moment, something brushed past the back of his neck. He spun. No one. But there, wet footprints, bare, small, leading from the water up to the grass and stopping just a few feet away from him. The creek was still. No ripples, no breeze. Caleb backed away slowly, heart drumming. He returned to the cabin, locked the door, and retrieved the leather journal. The next entry, June 5th. The water shows me things I never said out loud. I try to drown it out with the piano, but it hums back. Caleb pushed the journal aside, hand trembling. He grabbed his phone and tried to look up the cabin's owner again, but the listing was gone. Hemlock Creek Lodgings now redirected to a 404 error page. He tried calling the number from his booking confirmation. Disconnected. A car engine broke the silence. Caleb hurried to the window. A beat-up Chevy pickup truck parked on the gravel path. A man stepped out, mid-50s, heavy-set, wearing a sheriff's badge pinned to a faded flannel shirt. He approached the porch like someone approaching a cemetery plot. "You the writer?" the man asked, voice dry as autumn leaves. "Yeah," Caleb replied. "You the welcoming committee?" The sheriff didn't smile. "Name's Sheriff Keene. Just came to let you know, folks in town don't go near this place after dark. Never did." Caleb crossed his arms. "Why's that?" Keene scratched his chin. "Depends who you ask. Some say it's cursed. Others say the land remembers. Either way, I'd be gone by sunset if I were you." He started to walk back, then turned. "If you hear humming, don't hum back. That's how they know you remember." He left without another word. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. The air was thick and smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies in a wet sock drawer. He poured himself a whiskey and tried to write, but the keys felt wrong under his fingers. Too loud, too deliberate. A faint melody drifted through the cabin. At first, he thought it was the wind, but it had structure, repetition, a lullaby, off-key, humming. He stood up. The melody came from beneath the floorboards. He backed away, heart racing. Then something scraped against the piano keys. One note at a time, like a child learning which sounds make which ghosts appear. The final note was not played. It was whispered. His name. Caleb. Eli stopped just short of the porch steps. The shadows were thicker here, denser, somehow clinging to the warped floorboards and broken rocking chair like they belonged. The sun had disappeared behind the trees, casting the woods in a bruised violet hue, and the house loomed like something dragged from a memory too old and too painful to be real. He placed the old iron key into the lock. It turned with a sound like grinding bone. Inside, the house exhaled, not wind, something heavier, like breath, stale and earthy. Eli's flashlight flickered twice before stabilizing, its beam landing on a narrow hallway coated in peeling floral wallpaper. The floor groaned under his boots as he stepped inside, dust rising in lazy spirals. There were no signs of forced entry, no squatters, no vandal. Everything remained eerily still, as if frozen mid-thought. A pair of boots sat beneath the coat rack, a teacup on a doily-covered table, a child's shoe halfway down the hall. He moved cautiously, eyes scanning every corner. In the living room, above the fireplace, hung a framed photo, black and white, cracked along the edges. It was a family portrait. It was a family portrait, maybe from the 40s or 50s. A man and woman stood behind two children, one boy and one girl. All were unsmiling. The woman's face, however, was oddly blurred, not out of focus, but as though smeared by fingers, deliberately. The fireplace beneath it was filled with ash. Eli crouched and stirred through it with an old poker. Something metallic clinked. He retrieved a rusted object, a pocket watch, broken open, its hands stuck at 3:09. A cold draft passed through the room, extinguishing the warmth in his fingers. He turned quickly. Nothing. He moved to the back of the house, finding a cramped kitchen with rotting cabinetry and a ceiling stained brown. Drawers sat open. A calendar on the wall, faded with time, was still turned to February 1971, circled in red ink. There were more markings beneath that date, barely legible. "Don't let her near the mirror." Ellie backed away from the calendar. The floor creaked in protest. In the hallway, a narrow stairwell led to the upper floor. At the base of the steps, a massive mirror leaned against the wall. draped in a dust-cloaked bedsheet. Eli stood before it, heart ticking faster. The air around the mirror felt weighted, like it pushed back. For reasons he couldn't explain, he reached forward and pulled the sheet away. His reflection stared back, fractured by age, but still recognizable. But there was something else. Over his shoulder, a face began to appear. Pale, female, smiling, but not with joy, with hunger. Her mouth was a little too wide, her eyes too hollow. He spun around. Empty hallway, nothing there. Eli stepped back and yanked the sheet down over the mirror. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He didn't want to admit it, but the smell had changed. Something sour now clung to the air, like decayed lilies or old milk. Upstairs was colder. The rooms were mostly empty. Faded curtains, clawfoot beds, wardrobes with cracks. In one room, a child's bed remained. Toys lay scattered. A broken doll stared up at him from the floor, one glass eye missing. Beside the bed was a journal. He opened it carefully. The first few pages were doodles, stick figures, stars, trees. Then the writing turned erratic, spiraling. Mommy walks at night, but not like Mommy. She talks to the attic. Don't look at her in the mirror. She made Daddy sleep forever. The last page had one sentence, scrawled in frantic, oversized letters. She lives in the walls. Eli snapped the journal shut. He was halfway down the hall when he heard it. A tap, then another. From behind the wall to his right, his flashlight flickered again. The tapping grew louder, more urgent. Knuckles, fingernails, scraping. He froze. The hallway was empty. But the tapping, it was coming from the far end, from behind the locked door he hadn't opened. A small door, maybe to an attic crawl space. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave, to get out, to run. But Eli had never been good at running. Not from responsibility, not from guilt. Not from the memory of his father's eyes, sunken and pleading in that final month, whispering half-formed warnings about something beneath the house. He approached the door. The handle turned, but it was stuck. He pushed harder. It gave way with a sudden jerk, and the door flung open, revealing only darkness. A narrow passage descended into pitch black, the walls lined with rotting wood. It smelled of wet stone and something else, like iron. Eli descended one step, then two. The air grew colder, damper. He felt the presence before he saw anything. A pressure, like hands resting lightly on both shoulders. Then the whisper came, a woman's voice. You brought it with you, didn't you? He turned his flashlight toward the sound and saw nothing, but when he turned back toward the stairs, they were gone. There was no staircase behind him, just wall, just wood, just scratching. They said the woods behind the Casterly property used to sing. Now they only whisper. The morning after my first shift at the Deacon house, I woke drenched in sweat, my skin prickled with cold, though the heater was humming. I dreamt of the portrait again, only this time I was inside it. I could feel the brushstrokes sealing me in, layer by layer, the air thick with turpentine and mold. I stumbled to the sink, splashed my face, and stared at my reflection longer than I should have. Something about the eyes didn't feel like mine. I didn't say it aloud, but a phrase lodged in my head like a splinter. It remembers you. I tried to dismiss the unease with black coffee and a peanut butter sandwich, but the silence in my cabin felt watching. By the time I stepped outside, the sky had shifted from pink to overcast gray. The fog was denser than usual, curling around the branches like it had purpose. Sheriff Morrow was already waiting near the edge of the tree line in his truck. He was parked beside a battered sign that read, "Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted." Underneath it, someone had spray painted in red, or worse. "Ready for the tour?" he asked, biting into an apple like this was any regular day. I nodded, though my stomach churned. He led me on foot to a half-overgrown trail just past the Deacon property fence. This path used to lead to Old Casterly Hollow, he explained. Abandoned now. Technically county land, but nobody goes up there anymore. Why not? You'll see, he said, tossing the apple core into the brush. The woods swallowed us whole. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. Even the birds seemed to know better. I could feel the shift in temperature. Cooler, damp, charged with static. Then we reached it. A crumbling foundation with a single stone chimney still standing, blackened by time and fire. Around the ruins, someone had nailed dozens of wooden totems into the trees. Crude effigies carved into rough human shapes, faces scratched off or smeared with something dark. What the hell is this? I whispered. Morrow kicked at the ground. Locals say it's where the Casterleys held their gatherings. Bonfires, chants. Some think it was just backwoods superstition. Others think something darker lived here long before they did. He handed me an old photograph sealed in plastic. It showed a group of men and women, early 1900s by the looks of it, standing in front of the same chimney. All wore crude wooden masks. That's Mr. Deacon's grandfather, Morrow pointed out, tapping one figure with a gloved finger. Back then, they called it the listening circle. I shuddered. As we walked back, the trees seemed to close tighter around us. Branches scraped my jacket like fingers. At one point, I swore I heard a whisper. My name, carried on the wind. Morrow didn't react, but I noticed his shoulders tensed. That evening, I returned to the Deacon house for my second shift. The front door was unlocked again, though I was certain I'd bolted it the night before. The hall smelled stronger this time, like mildew and old rot. The staircase creaked louder than before, groaning like it remembered footsteps long gone. I brought soup and water up to the attic, but again, the tray from the previous night was untouched. This time, I knocked harder. Mr. Deacon? It's Eli. I'd like to check your pulse and clean up. No answer. I turned the knob. It was locked, but I never remembered locking it. Back downstairs, I tried to distract myself by organizing the mail pile near the fireplace. Most of it was junk or yellowed envelopes addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Emery Deacon. One, though, caught my eye, a thick manila folder from the Louisiana Department of Mental Health. I opened it. Inside were intake forms dated 1997. Emery Deacon, diagnosis, brief psychotic disorder with religious delusions, history of night terrors, multiple incidents of self-harm. Recommended for 60-day hold at Bell River Psychiatric Institute. Notes scribbled at the margin read, patient claims they speak through the ash, and insists house is swallowing time. My hands trembled. Behind the file, something slipped out, a faded Polaroid. It showed a younger Emery, seated on the front steps of this same house. His eyes were wide, terrified, and just behind him, barely visible in the window pane, was a face, except it wasn't human. At first I thought it might be a mask, but the more I looked, the more I realized the face had no mouth, only rows of white teeth where its eyes should be. The longer I stared, the more I felt like it stared back. I dropped the photo. That night, I slept at the cabin with every light on. I placed salt at each window and recited the old prayer my grandmother used when hurricanes approached. But sometime past midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on my porch. Slow, deliberate. I reached for the baseball bat I kept under the bed. The steps stopped. I held my breath for what felt like an hour before summoning the courage to look through the peephole. There was no one there. Only the trail of muddy footprints leading away from my door. Bare footprints, each with 6 toes, and on the wood, written in ash, were 3 words that hadn't been there before. You came back. The barn door groaned open with a force that didn't come from Ethan's hands. A stale gust of air hit him square in the face, sour, metallic, and thick with decay. He stepped back instinctively, flashlight trembling, and pointed it into the abyss. The beam cut through dust and cobwebs, revealing rusted tools dangling like forgotten relics, and a floor littered with straw clumps and bones too long to belong to mice. What the hell? Ethan muttered. Behind him, Marcy lingered at the threshold, hugging herself. I don't like this. Something about this place. It's wrong. It's off. Ethan didn't reply. Something on the far wall had caught his attention. A mural, if it could be called that. It had been painted directly onto the wooden planks in long, crude strokes, now faded but unmistakable. A skeletal figure with antlers stretched its arms outward, looming over a circle of faceless people kneeling in supplication. Around them were symbols, circles within circles, slashed triangles, and jagged lines like lightning bolts. He snapped a photo with his phone, though the device nearly slipped from his sweaty fingers. "We need to show this to Pastor Elric," he said. This is more than just a weird dream or local myth. This is organized." "Marcy, you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan held his breath. At first there was nothing, then barely audible, shuffling, like feet dragging across hay, then a long, low moan. Not an animal, human. "I think someone's in here," Ethan said, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then stabilized. As he rounded the corner past the mural, he spotted a figure crouched in the farthest stall. It was a man, naked, pale, and so emaciated that his spine jutted from his skin like a fishbone. He sat rocking, muttering under his breath, eyes squeezed shut, face caked with dried blood and mud. "Sir?" Ethan called out, his voice cracking. "Are you hurt? We can help you." The man's eyes snapped open. They were pure white. He screeched, an inhuman, piercing sound, and lunged, scrambling on all fours like a spider. Ethan barely dodged out of the way, crashing into a post as the man skittered past and disappeared into the shadows behind the hay bales. Ethan stumbled to his feet, heart hammering in his throat. "Marcy, get out now!" But she wasn't at the door anymore. She was gone. He ran outside, into the cool dusk air, scanning the clearing, nothing but trees and the long stretch of road. "Marcy!" he screamed. "Where are you?" A whisper rose in the wind, almost like her voice. Or maybe not. "He knows you now." He turned back to the barn and kicked the door shut behind him, bracing it with a fallen beam. Inside, the man's screech still echoed somewhere deep in the rafters. The next morning, Ethan drove to the town's historical society. The receptionist, an older woman with sharp eyes and dyed red hair, looked up over her glasses. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I might have," Ethan replied, still shaken. "I need to see records on the Hayward family, specifically Elias Hayward, and anything on ritual practices in the area, folklore, legends, whatever you have." Her lips tightened. "You with the sheriff?" "No, law firm, Turner and Knox, property investigation." She hesitated, then stood. "Follow me." The archive smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner. She led him to a back shelf and pulled out 3 thick binders, each yellowed with age. Most folks don't ask about the Haywards anymore, but they're all over this town's bones. He spent 2 hours digging. The deeper he went, the colder he felt. Elias Hayward hadn't been a reclusive farmer, as the property record implied. He'd been the leader of a fringe religious group in the 1936 called the Seekers of the Deer King. They preached about purity, rebirth, and the thinning of the veil. Townsfolk had whispered of the offering, a ritual held every 5 years, always in winter, always following a family tragedy. Then came the year 1944. A fire at the Hayward farm. No survivors, except one, a boy, name unknown, institutionalized for decades. No death records, no burial. Ethan stared at the old newspaper clipping of the fire. The grainy, black and white photo showed the barn. That barn, still standing even then. He zoomed in. There, barely visible in the shadows of the doorway, was a figure. Wide eyes, antlers. He slammed the book shut, heart racing. Back at the motel, he found Marcy asleep in the bed. fully clothed and curled into herself like a child. Her shoes were muddy. "Where the hell were you?" he whispered, shaking her gently. She blinked. I was in the woods. I think. He showed me." "Who?" Her eyes met his. "The one in the barn." That night, Ethan dreamt of the clearing again, only this time the barn was gone, replaced by a circle of stones, burning with cold fire. Inside the circle knelt figures in black robes, humming in low guttural tones. In the center stood a man crowned with antlers, his face featureless and bleeding. He turned to Ethan and held out a blackened hand. "Come forward, heir of guilt." Ethan woke up gasping, the sheets twisted around him like bindings. Something was moving outside the window. He stepped to the curtains and pulled them aside. Nothing. Then, just before he could turn away, the mirror on the dresser flashed. In it, his reflection was smiling, but he wasn't, not even close. The night stretched long and heavy over the damp fields of Terabor, its silence broken only by the occasional screech of unseen creatures lurking beyond the woods. Ethan knew something was waiting for him out there, something ancient and watching. After the episode at the old Hayward barn, he hadn't slept properly. His dreams were saturated with thick black water and muffled cries that came from beneath the floorboards. Even in the waking hours, he saw fleeting figures in his peripheral vision, pale shapes standing behind trees, always just out of reach. That morning, the motel mirror had fogged up inexplicably. Written across the condensation were 4 jagged words. "He's not your dad." Ethan had stood there, frozen, the towel slipping from his hand. When he blinked, the words vanished, leaving only his own haunted reflection. He didn't bother reporting it. Who would he tell? The old lady at the front desk with the cataract eye? Sheriff Mullen, who still wrote everything on yellow notepads and thought witches were just Halloween crap? Instead, he grabbed the photo album again. He had found it buried in a pile of forgotten boxes at his father's cabin. The same cabin that now reeked of mildew and faintly of rot, though he could find no source. The album had no labels, no dates, just black and white photos of children. Their eyes were often out of frame, their faces partially turned. He assumed some of them were from his dad's school years, maybe church camps or neighborhood events. But there was something wrong with the photos. Not just age or water damage, more like distortion. One girl had 3 arms, a boy in a straw hat had 2 shadows, and in several images, the same background appeared over and over again. A dead willow tree with a knot like a screaming face. As Ethan flipped the pages, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the inside back cover, scratched faintly into the leather, was a symbol, almost like a trident wrapped in thorns. He ran his finger over it, the surface oddly warm, and then he remembered. It was carved above the fireplace at the Hayward barn, half burned into the old wood. The day spiraled into a blur after that. He drove aimlessly through the town, passing boarded-up homes and the collapsed shell of the old church. No one waved. The gas station clerk refused eye contact, and even the dogs that usually wandered Main Street were nowhere to be seen. A low, oppressive pressure hung in the air like a coming storm. But there were no clouds, just that heavy metallic light and the endless cicada hum. At dusk, he returned to the Hayward barn. He didn't even remember parking the car. He was simply there again, standing before the warped door frame. A crow watched him from a crooked fence post, its one eye milky and fixed. The air inside the barn was colder than it should have been. Dust swirled lazily in the dying sunlight that bled through broken slats. Ethan's boots echoed on the warped floorboards as he stepped inside, holding his breath. The altar was gone. In its place was a shallow depression in the floor filled with murky water, the same water from his dreams. He knelt beside it, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. The surface was perfectly still, like glass, and as he leaned over it, his reflection rippled, then changed. It wasn't his face anymore. It was the face of a boy with hollow eyes and a stitched mouth, his skin pale and waterlogged. Ethan stumbled back, heart slamming in his chest, but didn't scream. because behind him, something whispered, "Do you remember now?" He turned sharply. No one was there, only the wind through the rafters and the soft creak of the barn breathing. But in the corner, the straw had been disturbed. He moved closer, crouched, and found something half buried in the grime, a child's shoe, soaked and rotting, and next to it, a rusted name tag. Ely Jr. His breath hitched. That wasn't his name. Not really. He had never been called Junior. His father was Thomas Como. But his birth certificate, he realized, was something he hadn't looked at in years. What if... He stood abruptly, backing out of the barn. His mind reeled with fragments, his father yelling at him to never go near the old schoolhouse, the smell of wet hay, the lullabies sung by a voice that wasn't quite his mother's. He drove back to the motel with shaking hands. When he arrived, the door to his room was ajar. Inside, the photo album lay open on the bed, turned to a page he didn't remember seeing before. It showed the barn, decades younger, pristine. A group of children stood before it in black robes, heads bowed. At the center was a boy, Ethan, or someone who looked exactly like him. There was a knock at the door. He turned slowly. A young girl stood there, barefoot, wearing a white nightgown stained at the hem with mud. Her eyes were solid black, reflecting the room like obsidian. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then she pointed at the bed, at the photo, at Ethan, and her mouth stretched wider than it should have, tearing slightly at the corner. Ethan stepped back, heart racing, but the girl didn't move. She only whispered one thing, finally audible, and it chilled him to the bone. "They're calling for you again." He shouldn't have opened the cellar door. Ethan's boots thudded dully on the wooden steps as he descended into the blackness below the Hayward house. The air grew colder, damper, more sour with each step, as if the house itself was exhaling its centuries-old rot into his face. The beam of his flashlight flickered, then steadied, illuminating the stone walls and shelves lined with canning jars, some still sealed, some cracked open and crawling with mold. Something scuttled across the far corner, too quick to identify. He stopped, listened. Nothing but the drip, drip, drip of water from somewhere unseen. He was just about to call it quits when he noticed the far wall. Mismatched bricks, darker than the rest. A recent repair? Or a cover-up? He crossed to it, pressed his hand to the stone. Cold, too cold. He knelt, ran his fingers along the edges and felt it. A breeze. There was a gap between the bricks. Not enough to see through, but enough to smell something foul seeping out. Heart pounding, Ethan grabbed an old crowbar from the shelf and jammed it between the bricks. They groaned in protest but finally gave way with a muffled crunch, revealing a narrow tunnel chiseled through the earth, about 5 feet high and shored up with wooden beams, rotted, splintering. It led somewhere deeper, somewhere the house didn't want anyone to find. He hesitated at the threshold. His phone buzzed. He jumped and pulled it out. No signal, but the screen lit up on its own. A single text message had appeared from an unsaved number. "Don't let her speak." Ethan stared at the message. "Huh?" he whispered aloud. A scream shattered the silence upstairs. It was high, sharp, human, and it was Lily. Ethan bolted back up the stairs, his flashlight swinging wildly. He burst through the door into the kitchen and nearly tripped over her. She was on her knees, clutching her head, sobbing, pointing toward the hallway. "She was here. Right here," she whispered in my ear. "Ethan, she said your name. She knew your name." "Who?" he demanded, dropping beside her. "The woman in the photo, from the album." She was standing at the mirror. Her mouth was moving, but it wasn't sound. It was like a static hum in my head. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream until she touched me. Ethan helped her up, guiding her into the living room. The fireplace, once cold and crumbling, now burned with a low, greenish flame. Neither of them had lit it. Lily stared at it. "The fire doesn't need wood." Ethan turned toward her. "We're leaving right now." They gathered their things in a frantic, silent haze, but when they reached the front door, it refused to open. The knob twisted, the bolt clicked, but the door wouldn't budge. As if the house was holding its breath, Ethan pulled harder. "Move, damn you!" A handprint bloomed on the glass. On the inside, a child's hand, tiny, pressed from the other side of the door. Lily backed away, trembling. "That's not yours." Then came the footsteps. Upstairs, slow, deliberate. Ethan turned, eyes locking with hers. "We have to go back down the tunnel." She didn't argue. They descended again, flashlight leading them back to the hidden passage. The bricks lay in a heap now, and beyond them the tunnel yawned wider, darker, somehow more ancient. As they entered, the walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with moisture. Ethan felt dizzy, his vision warped at the edges, like looking through warped glass. They reached a chamber at the end. It was a circular room dug crudely from earth and stone. In the center stood a pedestal. Upon it rested a cracked porcelain mask, child-sized, with no mouth, only hollow eye sockets and carved lines that resembled tears. Around the chamber, names were etched into the walls. Dozens of them, some scratched frantically, some neat and careful. At the top of the wall, lit faintly by the flashlight beam, one name made Ethan's blood freeze. Ethan Hayward, 2023. "That's this year," Lily whispered. "And that's your name." He didn't respond, because just then, the flashlight died. In the total dark, the chamber seemed to swell, as if it had been waiting for the light to die. Ethan reached for Lily, but she was no longer at his side. A voice, cold and clear, rang out behind him. "The name binds you." He turned, but saw nothing. Then a light, faint, greenish glowed from the mask. It rose slowly into the air, as if lifted by invisible hands. And in that glow, Ethan saw the figure from the photo, the woman, only now she was faceless. A blur of features, her skin as pale as paper, her hair coiled like vines, dripping moisture onto the stone floor. She floated inches above the ground. Lily's voice screamed from the tunnel, but it was distorted, like underwater. The woman extended a hand toward Ethan. "Take it back," she whispered. "Take the name, take the curse." Ethan tried to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The chamber spun, and just as the woman reached him, her hand almost touching his chest, he heard a second voice, a child's voice, from inside the mask. "You weren't the first." Then all light vanished, and the chapter ended in total, suffocating black. The dead don't whisper in cold hollow. They scream, but only if you know how to listen. Ethan stood outside the church ruins, the wind slicing through his coat like glass. The trees beyond trembled under a sky bruised with storm clouds, but the ground beneath his boots was disturbingly still, as though the land itself held its breath. The chapel had been reduced to charred beams and blackened stone, yet its presence loomed, undeniable, like a skeleton that refused to decay. He stepped carefully between shards of stained glass, half buried in the dirt, each piece reflecting distorted colors like fragments of a broken memory. On the far end of the nave, what remained of the altar crouched under a collapsed archway, its surface charred and cracked, except for one thing, a small brass plaque bolted into the stone, untouched by fire. It read, "St. Agnes of Silence. She watches, she remembers." Ethan exhaled slowly. That name had appeared again and again in the notes he found, on the back of old photographs, in newspaper clippings left behind in Margaret's attic. He pulled the latest of those fragments from his pocket, a torn flyer for a revival meeting from 1961, featuring a wide-eyed preacher and that same phrase, St. Agnes of Silence. He crouched near the altar and reached out to touch the plaque. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the air shifted. A soft pressure pushed against his ears, like the weight of deep water. Then he heard it, beneath the wind and creaking timbers. A low, rhythmic moan, repeating in a loop. It wasn't coming from the church. It was inside his head. He jerked back, heart pounding. "Stop," he whispered to no one, but the moan grew louder, forming words in a voice older than dust. "She never left. You opened the door. Now she remembers you." A scream caught in his throat and he stumbled backward into the nave, his foot catching on a broken pew. He crashed to the floor. For a moment all he saw were the heavy wooden beams above, splintered and scorched, hanging like teeth. When he stood again, something had changed. The ground at the front of the church, the spot just beyond the altar, was glowing faintly beneath the soot. Ethan moved closer, brushing ash away with his sleeve. The floor formed a perfect circle of black stone, inscribed with concentric rings and ancient runes that pulsed like veins beneath skin. He knew, without understanding how, that this was the origin point, the ritual site. Suddenly from behind him, the crunch of footsteps. Ethan turned sharply. A man stood silhouetted in the entryway, outlined against the gray light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the man raised his hand slowly. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "Not alone." Ethan squinted. "Do I know you?" The man stepped forward. He wore a long coat wet with snowmelt, and his boots were caked in red clay, the same strange soil Ethan had found near the collapsed cellar behind Margaret's home. "My name's Reverend Caleb Shaw," the man said quietly, "and if you've touched the circle, then it's already too late." Ethan stared at him, unsure whether to run or demand answers. "You were in one of the photos," he murmured, "with Margaret and my father." Caleb's expression darkened. "They never told you, did they? About the pact, about the offerings." "What offerings?" But Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the glowing ritual site. "That's not just a seal," he said. "It's a wound, and wounds remember pain." Ethan felt his skin crawl. "I didn't come looking for any of this. I just want to leave." "You will," Caleb said grimly, "but not as the man who walked in." Before Ethan could ask more, Caleb pointed toward the shattered bell tower at the back of the church. "There's someone you need to meet. Someone who still remembers the first summoning." Ethan followed him through the nave and up a crumbling stairwell into what remained of the bell tower. There, seated on a rotting bench, was a woman so thin and still she almost seemed carved from wood. Her voice came before her eyes met his. "You were the boy who cried in the dark," she rasped. "I remember your screams," Ethan shivered. "Who are you?" She raised a finger to her lips. "No names," she said. "They listen for names. But you're the echo, the one the house spat out." Caleb stepped forward. "This is Agnes, the last true witness." Ethan felt cold sweat on his neck. "Agnes? Saint Agnes?" The woman chuckled, hollow and bitter. "Saints die for something. I've just been waiting." Her hands, gnarled like roots, pointed at his chest. "The thing that haunted your father still walks. It has no shape until you give it one. And you already did." Ethan recoiled. "I don't understand." "You will," she said. "Tonight." Outside, the wind howled louder. The bell, broken, rusted, let out a deep, unnatural chime that echoed not through the town but inside his bones. And as the sound faded, Agnes whispered, "They never buried her body. That's why she remembers." Ethan turned to Caleb, his voice tight. "Whose body?" But Caleb was gone. In his place at the top of the tower stairs stood a figure Ethan recognized only from dreams. Tall, featureless, with long black hair that flowed in waves despite the absence of wind. The figure raised its hand, and Ethan's vision filled with red. The walk back from the river felt longer than it should have. The forest around Ethan seemed to breathe, branches groaning in the wind, brittle twigs snapping underfoot, the occasional scurry of unseen creatures in the underbrush. He held the envelope from the Historical Society tight against his chest, his flashlight's beam jittering across the path as if resisting where it pointed. Every step felt like trespass. At some point, he passed the old mile marker stone again, the one carved with the nearly erased number 1, and stopped dead. He had passed that stone heading down to the river, hadn't he? So why was it on this side now? He glanced around, trees now entirely unfamiliar. There were no signs of the path he'd taken. The forest wasn't dense exactly, but there was a strange sameness to it, like it copied and pasted itself around him endlessly. He quickened his pace. Shadows thickened. By the time the cabin's outline came into view through the trees, Ethan was slick with sweat, breath short and ragged. He didn't remember it being this far from the river. He burst through the cabin door, shutting it behind him with more force than intended. Dust puffed up from the floorboards, and the sudden silence pressed around him like a tomb. He leaned back against the door, envelope still crumpled in one hand. The radio clicked on again. He said he heard them whispering under the walls, Sarah. They told him things he couldn't have known. Click. Ethan stared at it. Then slowly, with shaking fingers, he opened the envelope. Inside was a collection of faded papers, some typed, some handwritten, some newspaper clippings. The top sheet was a scanned letter from 1946. To whom it may concern, it began. Regarding the massacre at Mourner's Hollow. The name hit Ethan like a punch. Mourner's Hollow. That's what the historical plaque near the cemetery had called the area once. But the cabin, the land, none of the records he'd pulled had ever mentioned a massacre. He read on. The bodies were found arranged in a circle, hands joined, mouths stitched shut. Sheriff Dempsey declared it a murder-suicide tied to ritual practice. Locals said it was the work of the Quiet Ones, an old name for a sect that believed in feeding memory to something that lived in the hollow. The victims had all reported strange dreams before their deaths. Some claim they saw the same woman. Long black dress, veil of thorns, face hidden. Ethan's hands trembled. Below that, a photo, grainy, low-res. A woman standing at the edge of the tree line, almost indistinct from the forest behind her. The image quality was poor, but something about her posture, rigid, unnatural, made his spine crawl. There were annotations scribbled on the back in pen. The veiled mother appears before a forgetting. Don't speak her name out loud. Thunder rolled in the distance. Ethan looked up. The fireplace flickered, though he hadn't lit it. The air grew colder. Something was wrong with the walls. At first, it was just a feeling. Then he noticed how the wallpaper seemed to ripple faintly, like parchment floating underwater. He moved closer. Words were bleeding through the plaster, faint like old ink under new paint. They coalesced slowly into a phrase. We fed her our names. Ethan backed away. His pulse thundered in his ears. The whispers began again, soft, insistent, like breath against the nape of his neck. He turned. No one there. Suddenly, the back door slammed open. A gust of wind howled through the cabin, scattering the pages of the envelope like leaves. Ethan scrambled after them, catching the one with the woman's photo as it skittered across the floor. But when he looked again, the image had changed. The woman was closer now, her face still hidden by the veil, but her body clearer. Long fingers, too long. Her head tilted slightly toward the camera, like she could see him through it. And now in the lower corner, barely legible. She's inside already. Ethan dropped it. The room darkened, every candle and flame extinguished at once. He fumbled for his flashlight. When the beam cut through the darkness, it fell on the window. There in the reflection, a woman stood just behind him. Veil, thorns, still silent. He spun around. Nothing. The air reeked of old roses and damp soil. That night, Ethan refused to sleep. He pushed the dresser against the door, sealed the windows as best he could, and sat with the flashlight pointed into every dark corner of the cabin. But sleep clawed at him anyway, and sometime around 3 a.m., his eyelids fell. He dreamed of the forest, but it wasn't silent anymore. Whispers, footsteps, the thump of something heavy being dragged across the forest floor, and in the distance, a rhythmic chant, voices rising and falling in a language he didn't understand, but his bones did. He woke up screaming. The clock said 6:13. How did the walls now bore more writing, scratched deep into the wood, angry and chaotic, You brought her back. Shaking, Ethan stood and noticed the envelope again. Only now, a new page had appeared, one that hadn't been there before. No date, no letterhead, just a list of names. At the bottom, Ethan Thomas Cole, and below that, in smeared ink, memory is the offering, blood is the door. From outside, somewhere deep in the trees, came the sound of a child giggling, and the unmistakable creak of a swing moving in the breeze. Except, there was no swing on the property, not anymore. They say the dead don't knock, but something was rapping at Ethan's door at exactly 3:13 a.m. The sound was soft, rhythmic, as if whatever was outside wasn't in a hurry, a polite cadence, like a child asking to come inside during a storm. But Ethan knew there was no storm. The sky was dry, the trees were still, only the knocking and his heartbeat broke the silence. He didn't move at first, lying in bed, sweat chilling on his skin. He tried to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe a raccoon, maybe the wind, maybe... The knocking stopped. He sat up. For a moment he thought it was over. Then he heard the whisper, low and sharp, curling through the keyhole like smoke. "Let me remember." Ethan bolted upright, scrambling out of bed. His flashlight's beam shook across the room. The door remained closed, the dresser still pressed against it. The whisper didn't come again, but the air was heavy with the memory of it, like the echo of a scream buried under snow. Downstairs, the fireplace was lit again. He hadn't touched it in days, and above the mantel, carved into the soot-blackened wood, was a new phrase. She was mother to silence. You made her here again. Ethan backed away, heart hammering. He tried to piece it all together, the letter, the photo, the voices, the list of names, the way the house kept shifting when he wasn't looking. Something ancient had been sleeping beneath this land, buried in silence, and now he'd woken it. In the kitchen, the faucet dripped, steady as a metronome. Ethan walked over and turned the handle tight. The dripping stopped, but when he turned back around, every cabinet door had opened on its own. Inside, he saw photographs pinned to the wood, not just of the house, but of him, sleeping, eating, walking toward the river, standing outside the church in town, each one stamped with a red wax seal in the shape of a thorned veil. His stomach twisted, his mouth went dry. He didn't know who had taken the photos, or worse, when. By mid-morning, he made the decision to leave. He stuffed everything into his duffel, papers, photo album, flashlight, spare batteries, and bolted out the front door before the house could change its mind. The trees loomed like sentinels, but he didn't care. He stuck to the overgrown path, half jogging until the roof of the old town library came into view. He wasn't going back to the motel. He wasn't going back to the cabin. He needed answers. The library smelled like old paper and forgotten breath. A heavy quiet pressed in from all sides, the kind that made footsteps feel like an offense. The local history section was tucked in the far back, behind warped shelves and a stack of books no one had borrowed in decades. Ethan ran his fingers across the faded labels until he found it. County Records, 19301960. There, between yellowed census papers and faded maps, he found what he didn't know he'd been looking for. A photograph, grainy, sepia, a gathering of townsfolk at a clearing, all smiling, all facing the camera, except one woman. She stood at the far edge of the group, hands clasped in front of her. Her face was veiled, no smile, no acknowledgement of the camera. Her shadow seemed darker than the others, as though the sun had refused to touch her. On the back, dedication to the Mourners Hollow Orphanage, June 14, 1947. Ethan stared at the date, the same year as the letter. He flipped the page. A news clipping was stapled beside it. Local orphanage closes after tragedy. Authorities say fire was accidental, but no survivors found. Some believe it was punishment for the unsanctioned rituals practiced by the orphanage founder, whose name remains redacted from public record. Locals call her Mother of Hollow. Ethan's blood ran cold. The woman in the photo, the one in his dreams, the one outside the door. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. His head throbbed. His breath came shallow. She never had a name, a voice said behind him. He turned. A woman stood there. Late 60s-esque, heavy coat, wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm sorry?" he asked. "She never had a name," she repeated. "Not a real one. They called her Mother or the Quiet Sister. But she was no sister of mine." Ethan stood slowly. "Do you know who she was?" The woman looked past him to the photo. "Everyone in this town pretends she never existed, but my grandmother remembered. Said she would come in the dreams of the lonely, that she fed on the grief people tried to bury. The orphanage wasn't a sanctuary, it was a vault, a place to lock her away. And now," the woman's voice was like gravel, "now someone opened the door again." Ethan's hands trembled. "How do I close it?" She hesitated. "You don't, not fully, but you can trick her. Lure her back to the place she was born." "Where?" The woman stared at him. "The church, in the woods. What's left of it." Ethan knew the place. He'd passed it on his first day in town. Just a stone arch and blackened ruins, swallowed by moss. "You'll need 3 things," she said. "Something that remembers, something that was forgotten, and something you wish you never knew." Before he could ask what any of that meant, she turned and walked away. No name, no goodbye, only a chill where she'd stood. Ethan left the library as the sun dipped low, casting blood-orange shadows across the ground. He felt them watching again, from windows, from under porches, from inside cars that hadn't run in years. The town knew. The town remembered, but none of them would help. He returned to the cabin just after dusk, and the swing was moving again. This time, there was someone sitting on it. The swing creaked, slow and deliberate. Ethan stood frozen at the tree line, eyes locked on the figure perched gently on the weathered wooden seat. It was a child, or something that looked like one. The figure was wrapped in a tattered shawl, face hidden in shadow, feet not touching the ground. But it wasn't the sight of it that chilled him to the bone. It was the voice that came next. "You brought the silence back with you," it said, without turning. Ethan's throat constricted. He wanted to scream, to run, but his feet refused to obey. He clenched his fists. "Who are you?" The swing stopped. The figure tilted its head just slightly. "I remember you from the fire." Ethan blinked. "What fire?" But he already knew. Deep down, some part of him had always known. The name scratched out on the orphanage's ledger. The photo. The scent of burned wood that still clung to the cabin floorboards even after all these decades. He had awakened something, not just from this place, but from within himself. The figure slowly stood. The shawl fell. There was no face beneath it, only a mask made of bone and string, stitched together like a child's cruel joke. Its smile sewn wide, forever grinning. Ethan stumbled back. His foot caught on a root and he went down hard. When he looked up, the swing was empty again. But he wasn't alone. From the edge of the trees, shapes moved. Tall and thin and wrong, swaying without wind. He pushed himself to his feet and ran inside, slamming the door shut behind him, heart thudding like a war drum. He didn't light the fireplace, didn't even turn on a flashlight. Instead, he reached into his duffel bag and pulled out the photograph he had found at the library. The orphanage dedication. He stared at the veiled woman again, mother of Hollow, the fire, the children. One of them had survived, and now he understood what the woman at the library meant. Something that remembers, something forgotten, something you wish you never knew. He tore open the floorboards in the back room, following instinct more than logic. Beneath the rotted wood, he found an old leather-bound book wrapped in stained linen. He didn't remember seeing it before. Its pages crackled with age. The ink was faded, written in looping cursive and fragmented Latin, but the meaning was clear enough. A binding ritual, not to destroy her, but to contain. He had the first item, the photo album from the cabin, pages soaked in memory, grief, and time. The second was the mask he now knew belonged to the one who had died in fire but never passed on. He hadn't known what it was at first, found in the shed his first night there. But it was hers. It reeked of smoke and sorrow. And the third? The third would be his own memory, its name, his past. He would have to forget it, to give it away freely, as an offering. But the ritual required more than that. It required blood. At midnight, Ethan walked the old path behind the cabin, guided by the stars and the pull of something ancient. The woods bent around him, trees leaning in close as if eavesdropping. The ruins of the old church stood silent, devoured by ivy and moss. Inside, the pews were gone. Only the altar remained, a blackened stone slab etched with names long faded. He placed the photograph at the base. He placed the mask on the altar. Then he took out a knife. It wasn't ceremonial, just a kitchen blade from the cabin, but it would do. He raised it over his palm. "I give what was mine," he whispered. "I surrender the name that bore me. I forget so she may be remembered." He cut. The blood dripped onto the stone. The mask hissed, and the world changed. The air thickened like syrup. The moonlight vanished. From the shadows, children's voices began to hum, not in English, but in something older, a lullaby made of ash and bone. The walls of the ruined church groaned. The stone beneath Ethan's feet pulsed like flesh, and then she arrived. She didn't walk. She unfolded from the dark, piece by piece. Arms too long, veil dragging like smoke, fingers sharp and endless. Her face was not a face, but the absence of one. A void wrapped in mourning cloth. She hovered over the altar. Her hands hovered above Ethan's head, and she paused. The ritual required an exchange, memory for silence, but Ethan hadn't expected to feel it. A warmth crawled up his spine, names blurred, faces dissolved. His mother, his brother, the girl he once kissed in junior high, all of them melted into static, gone, and in their place her voice. "I remember you now." Ethan screamed, but no sound came. He collapsed. The ground swallowed him whole. When he awoke, it was dawn. The church was whole again, the altar intact, the mask gone. And so was Ethan's name. He staggered outside, dazed and hollow. The birds chirped as if nothing had happened. The wind returned. But the cabin was no longer there, just an empty clearing, and a woman standing in the center of it. She wore a funeral dress. She held something in her hand, a photograph of him. Underneath, scrawled in blood, "He remembers her now." I thought the wind had stopped, but the silence wasn't natural. It pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I didn't even realize I was still holding the knife until I felt the sticky warmth of dried blood along the hand. Sarah was beside me, her shoulders trembling, her face pale but determined. After the events in the chapel, neither of us could speak. What was there to say after watching a man tear his own face apart, whispering in tongues to something that lived in the dark? We were on the outskirts of Harrow's Edge now, walking the ridge trail that led up to what the locals called the Burnt Estate. The name had always sounded dramatic, but as we climbed higher, we saw the skeletal remains of what had once been a manor. Blackened beams, scorched stone, and the twisted remnants of a wrought iron gate. Nothing could grow here, not grass, not moss, just ash, brittle and white like snow from another world. "We shouldn't be here," Sarah muttered. I didn't disagree, but the journal had led us here, and with it the sketches of the spiral brand, the same one that had appeared on my chest the night after the seance, the same one etched into the floor of the chapel. We weren't chasing ghosts anymore. We were being drawn, and this was the final pull. We crossed the broken threshold and stepped into the ruin. The walls were scorched down to their bones, but the floor plan was still intact. Beneath the debris, there were stone steps leading down, a basement or maybe a crypt. Whatever it was, the air seeping from the gap felt ancient and foul, like breathing through rotted cloth. My flashlight flickered as we descended. Sarah gripped my arm. "Don't look at it too long," she said suddenly. "What?" She pointed to a wall. For a moment I thought it was just soot, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw them. Faces, hundreds, maybe more. Not carved, not painted. Impressed, like someone had pressed screaming faces into the very stone. Mouths open in horror, eyes wide in agony. And in the center, a larger form. A figure cloaked in what looked like branches or ribs, its hands pressed outward, beckoning. We reached the bottom of the stairs. The room opened into a wide chamber, circular, with alcoves lining the walls. Each alcove contained an object, a mask, a blade, a book bound in what I desperately hoped wasn't human skin. This was no crypt. This was a vault of rituals. In the center was a pedestal. On it sat a bowl filled with thick, congealed liquid. I could smell copper and something sweeter, like decay masked with perfume. Behind it, a mirror, untouched by flame, perfectly intact and glowing faintly from within, and standing before it was my father. He looked exactly as I remembered him before the illness. Strong, stern, dressed in the coat he'd worn when he disappeared that night 15 years ago, the night he'd gone into the woods and never come back. "Dad?" I croaked. He turned, and for a moment he smiled, but it wasn't right. The smile never reached his eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. Sarah stepped back. "Eli, that's not your father." He moved toward us, footsteps echoing across the stone. "I had to feed it. Just once. That's all it asked, and the town would be spared. I gave it the offering, Eli. I gave it—" I felt something cold in my stomach. "You? You gave it Mom." His face twisted, not in guilt, but in pride. "She was willing. She knew the cost. But you were supposed to leave." Something shifted behind the mirror, not a reflection, a presence. I could see long, clawed fingers pressing against the glass from the inside. "It's still hungry," he whispered. From the alcoves came sounds, rattling, scraping. The items were moving. The blade lifted, spinning slowly in the air. The book opened on its own. The masks turned to face us. Sarah screamed as one of the masks launched itself toward her, biting like a snapping turtle. I tackled her out of the way, and the mask shattered against the wall, splintering into ash. "We have to break the mirror," I shouted. My father stepped between us and it. "You break it, you take its place. That's the rule. That's the price." The mirror's glow intensified. I could see into it now. Not just our reflections, but the chapel, the lake, the forest, the entire cursed lineage of this place. The past repeating itself. And in the depths of the mirror, something was rising. Sarah gripped the blade from the ritual altar and tossed it to me. I caught it just as the room began to shake. The faces in the wall screamed silently, mouths gaping wider, cracks spidering out from their eyes. The masks flew again, a swarm of gnashing teeth and howling wind. "I'm sorry," I told him. My father reached out, as if to stop me, but this time there was no power in his hands. He was a shell, a memory borrowed by the thing behind the mirror. I drove the blade into the base of the mirror. It didn't shatter. It screamed. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was the sound of something ancient and betrayed. Something ripped from its sleep too early. The light flared. We were thrown backward into the stone wall. When the dust settled, the mirror was cracked in 7 places. Each crack pulsed with red light, like veins beneath translucent skin. The faces on the walls had melted, leaving behind black holes that wept. The vault trembled again, more violently this time. Sarah pulled me to my feet. "We have to go, now!" As we scrambled up the stairs, the entire ruin began to collapse. Beams fell, stone cracked, and behind us came the sound of something climbing through the mirror's fractures. We burst out into the cold night. The sky above was roiling with unnatural clouds. The woods groaned, and somewhere behind us, from the shattered vault below, a new voice began to speak. It knew our names. He stood there for what felt like a century, the dagger pulsing in his hand like a second heartbeat. The circle had accepted him. The tower had claimed him. And yet, at the precipice of this ancient horror, Lucas felt resolute. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, shaking debris from the ceiling. The runes on the floor ignited once more, not red this time, but a searing white, illuminating the room like an autopsy slab. From the shadows behind the altar, something emerged. It was the figure from the wall. The stretched, thin humanoid with no mouth, no eyes, only skin wrapped tightly around bone like aged parchment. The thing crawled on inverted limbs, its movements insect-like and silent. Lucas backed away instinctively, holding the dagger outward, its obsidian tip shimmering with a faint, reactive glow. As it moved, the creature whispered, not with a voice, but directly into his mind, "You've come to finish what the others couldn't." Lucas gritted his teeth, stepping closer instead of retreating. "I came to stop you," the entity cocked its head, "but you are me now." In a flash, it lunged. Lucas swung the dagger upward in a clumsy arc. The blade met resistance, a hard, brittle sensation like bone cracking under heat. The creature recoiled with an unearthly screech, black ichor dripping from a gash across its chest. But it wasn't just the physical wound. Something deeper reacted to the obsidian. The tower itself groaned. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, becoming distinct voices. The tenants who had vanished. They weren't pleading anymore. They were guiding. "Push it back. Use the name. Remember the name." He remembered the sigil carved into the floor, the one matching the worn medallion found in 7B. He screamed the name that had echoed in his dreams, carved into stairwells, whispered behind walls. "Alredrek!" A burst of pressure pulsed outward from the dagger's tip, slamming the creature against the wall. The runes began to unravel in midair, like a reel of magnetic tape flinging off its spool. The creature shrieked, its body tearing in sections, unraveling like a burnt flag in the wind. Lucas fell to his knees, vision blurring, the dagger dissolving into ash in his hand. Then, silence. The tower sighed. The weight of it all eased, like lungs finally allowed to exhale. Lucas stayed on the floor, panting, his limbs numb, as if the tower had bled him of more than strength. Moments or hours passed. He stood eventually, limped back through the now flickering hallways, past the doors that had once whispered, now mute. Apartment 7B was just an empty room, no altar, no sigils, no Marcy. Outside, dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and oranges. Emergency crews had surrounded the building. Lights flashed. Someone wrapped a blanket around him. Someone else spoke into a walkie-talkie. He saw his brother's face briefly before the crowd swallowed him. Lucas said nothing. He didn't need to. He had survived. Weeks passed. The story was cleaned up by the city. A gas leak. Structural failure. Nobody believed him. The dagger had disintegrated. The tapes from the building security system were blank after 9:00 p.m. Marcy was listed as a missing person, along with dozens of tenants from years before. Lucas kept to himself. He moved into a motel on the outskirts of town. Quiet, nothing above the 3rd floor. He started a journal, chronicling everything he remembered, sketching the runes that still haunted his sleep. One day, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, the entrance of Andalcourt Tower. But not how it looked recently. The image was old, weathered. A date scribbled on the back read, Oct 31, 1952. And in the doorway stood a woman in a dark dress, holding a child's hand. The woman was Marcy, but the child, Lucas's eyes widened, had no face. He dropped the photo. His hands trembled. From across the motel room, his bathroom mirror fogged over, though there was no heat running. 3 words appeared, scrawled into the condensation. "It lives again." Lucas blinked. The words faded. But he knew they weren't gone. The tower hadn't been exorcised. It had been fed. And somewhere, maybe beneath another city block, maybe beneath someone's feet right now, the foundation was pulsing again, waiting for the next name to call. From the motel hallway, a knock. Lucas opened the door slowly. A girl stood outside, no face, but wearing the same locket Marcy used to wear. She tilted her head. "You left something behind, Daddy." Fade to black. Thank you for joining me on this chilling descent into the shadows of Andal Court Tower. If you've made it this far, you're one of the brave few who dared to look behind the doors, listen to the whispers between the walls, and follow Lucas into the depths of something ancient, something that remembers. Stories like these aren't just fiction. They're echoes of the places we avoid, the histories we bury, and the truths we pretend not to see. Sometimes, buildings don't forget, and neither do the things that live inside them. If this story kept you up tonight or made you glance twice at your apartment door, you're not alone. That's the beauty and the curse of horror. It stays with us. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another tale from the dark side. Until next time, sleep with the lights on, and whatever you do, don't answer the knock at your door after midnight.